Good evening. Welcome to the West Fargo City Commission meeting for Monday, May 4th. This is a virtual meeting via Zoom. To start out, we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic
which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first order of business is to approve the order of the agenda. It has been distributed. It's been on the website and it's been distributed to the commissioners.
I'd make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdevig. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Brad Olson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the order of the agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next order of business is the approval of the minutes for April 20th, 2020. They have been distributed and they are on the website. Is there any additions or corrections?
I'll move to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Jurdevig seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the April 20th, 2020 meeting as distributed. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next order of business, building permits. Any comments? Any
Motion to
questions?
approve.
Again, thank you, Commissioner Olson. It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Thorstead seconds. Been moved and seconded to accept the building permits as distributed. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next order of business is the consent agenda. We have items A through D. They have been distributed and they have been on the website.
I would make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdevig. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Simmons seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda as distributed. Is there any discussion? Moving forward, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next order of business on the regular agenda, item number 1 is the utility rate study presentation. AE2S will be leading this discussion with us.
Good evening. Sorry, are we good? Can you hear us okay?
Yes, sir. Please proceed.
So yes, thanks for having us in this virtual environment, which times were different and we were able to present our recommendations face to face, but we appreciate joining you via Zoom tonight to present the draft results and recommendations of the rate study. My name is Sean Gaddy. I am with AE2S Nexus, the financial sister company to AE2S. I also have with me Ryan Graff, who was our lead financial analyst on the work. Ryan and I are going to tag team the presentation here tonight. We have 20 plus slides to work our way through. We'll do our best to work our way through it quickly and address any questions that you have, as well as talk about next steps with the work. So, sorry, we're having a little glitch here. There it goes. There we go. So when we think about the rate study and specifically what we've really been focusing our efforts on in terms of developing rates that will create sustainability for West Fargo today or starting tomorrow and into the future, is really looking at a few key areas of need within the community. Obviously, when we think about some of the bigger items that are out there, both for your water and sewer funds, you are transitioning to a wholesale service model, meaning that you are purchasing water treatment, supplied water from the city of Fargo. And similarly, you are transitioning to a wholesale wastewater service model where you're getting out of the business of treatment yourselves and have a contract for service with the city of Fargo, like I said, to transition that service over time. West Fargo is a fast-growing community that also places a number of unique demands when it comes to setting rates for a community that is growing at your pace. And you now are getting to the point, especially with studies and projects like the Core Area Infrastructure Master Plan, where you're aging enough as a community. Not only are you growing, but you're also aging as a community to the point that there are some key renewal needs within the system. When we think of those three areas and we consider where your rates are at today, the whole goal of this is to try and drive you towards some utility rate setting best practices with the study. We're going to hit on a few key areas. Ryan's going to go as the lead analyst, is going to go through a few of these areas in a little bit greater detail this evening. But specifically, we want to talk about the revenue requirements, what you're funding today in the utilities and how that's projected to change over time, and also consider where you're at with your cash balances and setting appropriate reserve targets moving forward. Looking at the rate structure, the rates that you have today, and ultimately what we're proposing for rate changes into the future through our recommendations. Our scope that we were tasked to do had five main task areas. I've hit on each of these a little bit, but real quickly, I'll just jump through our scope of services to provide some context to what we're going to show you here throughout our presentation this evening. The big task, the first task, is looking at your revenue requirements. We start that from looking at the budgets that are in place for water and sewer and analyzing what we expect for change in the coming years. Specifically, we've developed 10-year rate analysis models where we've forecasted your revenue requirements and looked at a projection of how you plan to fund things within the utilities. And like I said, use that to forecast forward that anticipated expense over a 10-year horizon. In the second task, what we've done is we've tested those revenue requirements through what we call a cost of service analysis. So your community has a few different customer classes of service, your largest being the residential class. You have commercial class of service, and then there is some industrial class of service. And what we're doing in the cost of service is really looking at overall, what are you trying to fund? And how are each of those classes of service driving that cost in order to set rates appropriately between those classes? We do that then through the rate structure review and analysis, analyzing alternative rate approaches that Ryan will step through in a little bit greater detail in a few moments. Embed other revenues that you have to the systems. There's other miscellaneous fees and surcharges that are included within your utilities, and bring all that together in task 5, which ultimately becomes the 10-year financial plan. We call it here a revenue adequacy analysis, but it's really testing the task 1 revenue requirements against the long-term rate recommendations in consideration of growth, and how do you stack up ultimately when it comes to the financial sustainability of each of the water and sewer funds in our projections. Thinking about the water and sewer systems, just to set the context here a little bit of the systems that you have today. The key point of this slide and these graphics is to represent generally just what you own overall within these systems. In the water, sewer, and inclusive of stormwater system assets, you have over 500 miles of horizontal pipe network running throughout the west city of West Fargo. That's split between water, sanitary, and storm as indicated. If you were to go to replace all of those systems today, based on a review of your asset base, you own a little bit more than $300 million worth of infrastructure throughout your community. And obviously that comes with an expense to operate, maintain, and renew. And a huge driver for the rates is really how much you own and what it's going to cost to maintain and renew them moving forward. You serve approximately just over 11,000 accounts on both the water and sewer side of things, and you treat nearly 900 million to 1 billion gallons of water each year to serve those accounts. So not that water supply volume isn't, I'd say, way out of whack from what we see typically for a community of your size on a per capita basis. And like I said, this is just to set the tone a little bit on what you own and who you serve as both a water and sewer utility. Quickly here, your water budget for 2020, roughly $7.9 million in total planned expenditures within the water fund. That is in comparison to planned rate revenue of nearly $8.4 million. So slight revenue surplus expected for 2020 in the water fund. Your utility rate structures as they exist today are relatively homogeneous and simple. You don't have differing class definitions. You charge the same fixed charge per account and variable charge per account regardless of class of service. We're going to talk about some potential changes there for consideration. On the sewer side of things, a relatively newer fund than the water fund. I believe you just split those funds, I think it was 3 years ago. And as we look at that, it's a fund a little bit more in its infancy, generating essentially just operating expense generate rate revenue to cover operating expense at a slight deficiency as it budgeted for 2020. And our whole goal here is to get to revenue sufficiency and sustainability within the sewer fund, especially considering those number of changes I pointed out that are in the works. The rates for the sewer fund, currently you charge a fixed $9 per month charge to all customers, which includes 10,000 gallons of treatment, and you charge a minor amount then of $1 per 1,000 gallons for any flows above 10,000. One of the things Ryan will point out is not very often, given that you're largely charging a residential class of service, does anyone tip into that? Most sewer usage is far less than that for indoor needs, near your average around 4,000 gallons. So you don't generate very much variable revenue within the sewer fund. And when we consider you're on the path to paying for every unit of service or every unit of discharge from the city of West Fargo through your wholesale service agreement, that's one of the big things we're going to look at changing with our proposed rate recommendations. Now I'm going to ask Ryan to dive into a little bit more of the detail of the specifics of the rate analysis.
Thanks, Sean. Commission President Dardis, members of the commission, thank you for having us again. It's been our pleasure working with city staff as we look to help set a new path forward for your utilities to make sure they are sustainable to continue offering. Continue to offer high quality service and make sure that you can fund that high quality service well in the future, right? As you think about how you are going to start planning over the long term for these funds, one of the first things that we started looking at was reserves. And what should your reserves be set at? In general, reserves are there often for when you, hopefully that you'll never actually use them, right? They're kind of there for the rainy day or maybe for the future. And in the instance of future capital planning, they are there for you to use them and kind of offset the cost to those rates in the future. But what we looked at are really 5 key types of reserves, from operating reserve, which we recommend as a 90-day O&M minimum, through debt service, which is largely out of all of our hands, as that's set by the legal documents that go into financing large capital improvements. We took a look at the capital planning reserve, which is based on a combination of what assets do you have, what will you need to replace, and what are you planning already to replace. We take a look at emergency reserves and what is it that you should keep on hand as a just in case, whether a large line breaks or a pump station or goes down and you have to be able to call and pay for someone far quicker than you could access capital markets if you needed to. And then looking at finally kind of a rate stabilization reserve, which is often used to help mute the ebbs and flows that come along with funding different types of capital improvements. And that's really based on direction from commission and how policy is set. Of these, we did spend the most time looking at the capital reserves, just because that is one of the, I guess, more unknowns at the start of the study as to how you were going to fund a lot of this capital. On the O&M side, we can project forward how much it's going to cost to continue service through the various users. But with the capital, what we wanted to do was really get a handle on both a breakdown of your kind of horizontal infrastructure that's under the ground, and when it might need to be replaced, when you might need to pay to start replacing some of them. We also, after this, will look at your short term. But what we focused on here is, largely how many miles of pipes do you have? In the bottom right, what type of material are they? How long have they been in the ground? And then with a lot of these pipes, especially, the PVC and the newer types of pipes that you'll see, they are, in the top right, very long life assets that don't really start seeing failure rates until they're, significant failure rates until they're over 50 years old. And so how can we really incorporate those needs together with how your community is planning on investing in your capital? And really primarily driven by the age of your assets and the type. From your capital reserve planning standpoint, we're looking at how you're funding your CIP that Dustin will talk about in a few weeks as your primary way to reinvest within these types of assets within your system. What we did next is we looked at your short-lived assets, and what those are ones that will need to be funded and reinvested in on a more frequent basis, hence the term short-lived. You had about, as we looked at the replacement value of those, what it might cost today if you were to have to go in and fix them or replace them all, you have over $18 million in total assets with the depreciation, most of them being fully depreciated, and about 17.8 million in total depreciation. If you looked at your combined unreserved cash, which isn't necessarily always the best proxy, but you've funded about a third of that replacement value. And with the assets that are remaining, we're looking at about an annual depreciation of $187,000. And so that's really what we focused on, is that current annual depreciation and how we can use that to set your reserving amount that you're setting aside in every year, and then that total depreciation on what our goal is between the two assets. And that's a good point. These are for your combined water and sewer funds. And so all of that together, these are our general recommendations between your operating reserve, looking at about $2.4 million split between the two of the utilities. Your debt reserve for your water utility there, a little over $1 million. An ideal long-term goal for your capital reserve of close to $9 million, and then an emergency reserve of $1.5 million of the cost of a pump station. And then, as I said, looking to kind of play catch up with that, putting the annual depreciation of $187 for each utility, setting that aside on an annual basis to really start on the path to funding these long-term reserves. With those reserves in place, the next item we really took a real hard look at is the rate structure, and how that can be updated to meet the current needs of your utility. As we start thinking and talking about rate structures, I wanted to give kind of a background on what the global types of rate structures are out there. Generally, you have two large types, which is either your fixed, which you see there on the left side of your screen, or the volumetric, which is on the right. Fixed won't change month to month, depending, and often can vary, depend on either your meter size, or depending on how much debt you have. There's a number of ways you can kind of tackle the fixed. Right now, On your water side, you have more of that flat rate. That's the second from the top. On the sewer side, you have the one on the bottom, which is more of a minimum charge that includes usage. On the right, you have, again, a variety of different ways you can charge for volume or the amount of water or sewer they're sending, pulling from the pipes or sending back. Whether that's inclining, where at different volumes they get more expensive, whether it's uniform, everybody pays the same amount regardless. Declining is one of the kind of the older ways that the industry's gotten away from in years, as we've identified the cost of actual expansion and capacity upgrades. But the thought there is that the more you use, the less that people would pay. And so that's not really the preferred approach anymore. And then you have seasonal, which really covers that increased demand that you can see. Well, we have snowflakes there, raindrops in the summer might be a little bit more apt as you, if you have a lack of it or a sun, right? Scorching the lawn, you'll want a nice green lawn and you'll want to generally use more water. With that, though, as kind of the background, we looked at your current water rate structure at that flat, for all accounts, to fixed charge. Really, the key there is it doesn't reflect the different capacity demands that users with larger meters that pull more water off your system actually have associated with needing that larger demand. And so we're recommending that you look at a varied rate per meter size, and that's basically your industry standard on the water on how you have equivalent meters are called. On your variable charge, it's a $7 flat, no matter how much is used for, and no matter what user class. That doesn't necessarily really take into account how the peaks that can be put on the demand of your system infrastructure. And while you don't own the water treatment plant itself, as need for expansion were to grow there, those costs would be passed on to the city, right? And so as you look at how to appropriately charge for those capacity related and signal to your users, the impacts their peaking usage can have, we're recommending that you do have an inclining block structure on the residential. What that would look like in practice is really the bulk of your users, those residential users, would all pay really the same price for their meter size because they all have the same type of demand on it from that perspective. But those residential users that use a lot of water in the summer at above 20,000 gallons, which was, we actually calculated that by looking at the average user and then overlaying what the recommended irrigation demand from NDSU would be on top of that. And so if you are an average homeowner using, washing dishes, doing laundry at a typical rate, and then you were to go out and water your lawn as the amount NDSU would recommend for a 10,000 square foot lawn, you would still be in tier 1. It's only those users that were to use a lot of water beyond that would end up in tier 2. And then for your commercial and your other users, were based on how they actually use water within your system, recommending a uniform so they pay the same regardless of the amount of water that flows into their building.
The one thing I would point out here is, for the residential class, your usage patterns across that residential class of customer service are pretty consistent. The reason we don't recommend any varied inclining decline type block on consumption blocks or consumption volumes for your non-residential class is because your users can vary significantly. A car wash will use something very different than, say, a restaurant in any given month. And so it's hard to define blocks of usage and different pricing for your non-residential. And that's typically why we go something like an inclining for residential to recognize their peaking factor demands, and a uniform structure for commercial, just recognizing that those customers within a commercial and industrial class are quite varied within themselves.
And one last thing on that, where you recoup more of the cost then is on that fixed meter size, because those different varying types of demands will require that they have larger meters. And so that's where you're getting a lot of the appropriate revenue from that piece. With the sewer, what really stood out is that first 10,000 gallons per month that was included in your fixed charge. What it does is it treats all users the same, basically, that use less than 10,000 gallons, whether they're using 1,000 and you're going to have to either send that to your lagoons, and as your lagoons are decommissioned over to Fargo, or whether they're using 9,000. And so typically the more equitable way to look at that is not including any in that fixed charge, and that's what we're recommending moving forward. And having that tied to more of the fixed costs within your system, and then having the variable charge associated with the actual cost of the gallons that they're sending down the drain at any one point. Here, as Sean pointed out at the beginning, you're not going to have a lot of individual homes, individual residences really using more than 10,000 gallons. And so what we're recommending here is based on winter average capping that at 8,000 per user. And so you're not charging them for the amount of water that they use to water their lawn or other outdoor activities when it's not going through your system, and you won't be sending it on and paying for it that way. So just in general, on the fixed side, we're recommending a flat rate, continue to maintain that flat rate, but reduce the gallons to 0 within that. And then on the volumetric, looking at a uniform rate for commercial, and then the same on the residential, but capping it at 8,000 gallons. With that structure in place, what we then did is we went and started looking at the long-term financial plan and how can we use that new structure to help generate the revenue needed to meet your long-term needs within your utilities. It really is the culmination of this process as we went through your system as a whole, and this is more just the cost of service, but really identifying how much of those costs should be going to each of the user classes so we can really fairly set those rates and ensure that we're recouping enough to cover your budgeted projections. When we do that, and we've alluded to it throughout the rest of the presentation, but we only really have two things we can charge for as a business, right? And often that's how we look at utilities as business enterprises. That's why there are enterprise funds. We have our accounts, the number of people that we have hooked onto the system, and then we have the number of gallons that we can meter. And so it's important how we're growing those over the years, because that's really what we're going to use to be able to say, at this rate, this is how much revenue we're projecting. And so in general, we're projecting about a 2 to 3% annual growth rate across your utilities. So growing from approximately 11,000 meters today accounts to about 14,000, and from under 1 billion gallons to on the water side to over 1.1 billion gallons. It doesn't look as large of a jump on the sewer side, and that's just because we have adjusted in our projections for that cap on residential usage. And so we're not projecting revenue that would never come based on how we're actually recommending that you charge for it. So as we looked across the 10-year span on the water side, here we have on the right a graph showing total expenses, and we're hoping to put that in terms of your budgeted revenue. And when we model, it is slightly different than your budget, and we're kind of what the items we include, and we look as we're projecting forward. And so that's why it's not going to match up here. But really the key takeaway is as your O&M costs escalate and as your growth in water demand increases, those budgeted revenues of today would not suffice to fund your utility in 2029. and as we are incorporating, as we look at what rates would be needed to fund your utility in 2029 on those growth. And, but just, so primarily the driver here is that kind of the rate funded capital or debt service, as well as the growth in the O&M budget. And so in the end, these are the fees, recommended rates for 2020, and then growth increases beyond that, also in line with that approximate 3% inflationary as we're kind of looking at it, and across the time span. And so on the fixed side, there is a modest increase of about a quarter per month recommended for those rate 3/4 inch meters, with residential volumetric tier for tier 1 being at $7 per thousand, and then anything over that being at $8.75, and then commercial and multifamily at this point still being at that around $7 per thousand gallons they use. Similar process on the sewer side, but really the hard item here that needed to be accounted for is as you start decommissioning the lagoons and start sending more water away from your community, or I guess sewage, right, away from your community, there will be a cost associated with it. And so that's really what we needed to incorporate into the long-term projections for how we set rates, because the current budget or revenues would not suffice for that. What we're recommending then is the $9 per month across all users, and then $4 per thousand gallons for all usage except residential, where it's capped at, again, that 8,000 gallons a month. As you do ramp into that service from Fargo, we'll continue to need sizable increases on those rates until you kind of reach that stability point around year 2027, where you drop down to more inflationary increases. One of the core reasons that you don't want to necessarily do it all at once, and I think it's important to note here, is that if you get more users coming on, more accounts than projected, or as you shift the demands on your capital plan, you don't want to overcorrect in the future, or I mean at the present, and then have excess in the future as you look to fairly charge your current users. And so that's why we do have that kind of longer term plan ramping into the rates and the larger rates necessary. What that would mean when these rates are implemented is that on the water side, between your 2019 rates and your proposed rates, you'd see about for a 4,000 gallon per month user, you'd see about a quarter increase. On your sewer side, you'd see about a $16 increase. For a larger user, 10,000 gallons on the water side, you'd still only see a quarter increase to their rate. But you'd see a $32 increase on their sewer rate. And that with those larger users is where that cap comes into play, because if there wasn't a cap, they'd see an additional $8 per thousand, or $8 per month as they use more water. With that, really, we're here kind of the first part of how we're rolling out these projections, able to provide information for you, and we'll continue hoping to kind of provide the information needed to help you make the decision that is right for your community as you look at our recommendations here, and provide that information too. So as leaders of the community, you're able to have those conversations with your constituents and help explain the need and the rationale behind the decision you do make.
Yeah, I think, Ryan mentioned engaging key stakeholders. I think we're engaging a key group of internal stakeholders here this evening with the commission. And then beyond that, I do understand that speaking with Jim and Tina, they do want to have some more focused discussions and pared down conversations with the commission. That is another level of engagement with the commission and this group that is planned. And beyond that, some of those next steps as far as ultimately implementing these recommendations will become a part of the overall outreach plan for rolling out the new rate increases to ensure everyone understands the purpose and the need for the increases. We just have a couple of slides left here, and then we'll open it up to any questions or conversation. Ryan presented that 10-year plan, and we wanted to just bring it back high level and think about some metrics in order to measure the success of the plan and how we're doing. One of the things that we use in order to measure that success is a survey that's done every couple of years by the American Water Works Association. And that survey it's a benchmark analysis requested of water, wastewater utilities all across the U.S. in order to understand how the industry is performing and what are some of your better performers versus not. And we just ran a few of those metrics to show you how this plan is projected to work. There's three things here. There's days of cash on hand. So really, when we bring it back to the reserving discussion, how are we projected to grow reserves in both the water and sewer fund? And how does that compare to industry benchmarks? Similarly, debt service coverage. You currently carry some debt in the water fund, no debt in the sewer fund. But coverage is really just after you pay for your essential operation and maintenance expense, how much revenue do you have left over as a factor of the debt service you have? The higher the number, the better when it comes to coverage. That's usually required per your bond covenants. And we're measuring that over time within the plan as well for those planned debt service expenses across the 10 years. And then operating ratio is similar from a standpoint, but this is measured on a percentage basis to understand your total O&M costs in comparison to your total operating revenue that you're generating from the rates that Ryan was just describing. So those benchmarks for both water and sewer is the last table we have here. We're presenting a few different numbers, and I want to just describe high level what you want to see. In the top metric, obviously days of cash on hand, the more the better. And the operating ratio, you actually want to see that percentage smaller. What that means is you're generating revenue in excess of your operating expense. So your better utilities are going to have a lower percentage here. And on the debt service, the higher the number, the better. A higher factor of revenue above and beyond your debt expense is overall seen better from a credit standpoint. Looking at the cash on hand and what was in your unaudited end of year 2019 financial statement, you're doing pretty well on the water side of things, close to the AWWA median, 317 days of calculated cash on hand relative to the median 320 in the upper quartile of close to 600 days unrestricted cash on hand from the water standpoint. Sewer side, a little bit lower. And that is one thing as we project to the future and as you overlay all of that new expense, that's going to be a tough one for the coming years here as you grow the sewer utility and it becomes a more mature operating fund of the city of West Fargo. In the other metrics then on the sewer side of things, you can see we are getting better. So although we're struggling to grow cash just because of all the additional demand on the sewer fund, our increases are allowing us to drive down those operating percentages, no longer operate at a deficiency, get that operating ratio in a better condition. And then when we do start to introduce some debt, have the ability to meet coverage. Typically what you're going to see, you'll see over there in the projected 2029 sewer debt service coverage ratio, far bottom right cell of the table, 1.24. Usually a minimum is right around that 1.2 factor. So we are getting the sewer fund healthy enough to be able to fund that debt from a coverage standpoint moving forward. Like I said, these are all benchmark ratios. It allows us to understand the plan that we've developed and are we tracking towards better, more sustainable funds for the city of West Fargo. And you can see here in almost all the metrics, the plan as proposed is getting you closer to the median, and in water, in some instances, even getting you closer to the upper quartile in terms of cash available within that fund. With that, that is our wrap-up slide here. You see Ryan and I's name there. This is typically where we open it up to questions, but maybe before that, I'd ask Tina or Jim if you had any comments you'd want to add from all of the detailed discussions we've had with you in getting to this point.
Thank you, Sean and Ryan. I'll just chime in and reiterate something that you already said. My intention is that Jim and I, Sean and Ryan, and Matt Anvig will be meeting with all of you to go over the details and to get your input and dissect it better, give you some time to digest, so that we have a clear understanding of what it is you want to have happen going forward. We knew the sewer fund wasn't in good shapes. I'm glad to see the water is on check. So with that, I will just let you ask questions, and I'm here if you have questions for me.
Commissioners, do you have any questions?
I have a few.
Commissioner Thorstein.
And I know this could be further vetted, as Tina just pointed out, but when you talk about the parameters for your reserve fund, when you're talking reserve fund, you're talking O&M, which is operation and maintenance. You're not talking replacement, yet you alluded to the depreciation in the system and how we've almost fully depreciated it out. That's not the intention of creating a reserve fund is for replacement, is it? Outside of, under a maintenance situation.
Go ahead, answer.
Yeah, I was gonna look to bring it up, but in short, we are recommending that we do have an O&M reserve fund itself, which is equivalent to 90 days O&M for your system. On the water side, that'd be about 1.5 million. On the sewer side, that's about 900,000. But then as you look at how you fund both depreciation, renewal, and replacement of assets, it is best practices to have some reserve set aside as you look to start replacing some of your assets. We've currently are recommending that you do have a capital replacement and repair or a capital replacement fund of approximately 9 million, which is based on the replacement value of your short-lived assets. And we're recommending that you set aside on an annual basis an amount equivalent to twice the depreciation within your system to help catch up to that amount. And so we do recognize that you will be reinvesting in your system through planned capital expenditures. But as you look at the wear and tear of all of the life type of your assets within the system, it is best practices that you look at how much is actually being depreciated on an annual basis and how that compares to your reinvestment and where you can where you sit accordingly and set aside funds to be able to cover some repair and replacement in the future.
So I understand these are enterprise funds. So obviously, is that allowed by state law? Because I know some municipalities have tried to apply an infrastructure fee, a straight out fee, not something that was part of their rates, and it got rejected by the courts. So I just want to make sure that's something that's allowable, that we're adding X number of dollars on to every month's bills to help fund replacement at some point.
Reserving in this fashion is allowed in many utilities. We work with Fargo, Grand Forks, Williston, to name a few. All of them are looking at similar reserves and do plan within their enterprises the same way that we're showing here.
Right. And
Mike, this is, sorry.
No, you can go ahead, Tina.
Commissioner Thorstead, one nice thing about going through and finding out what the cost truly is to provide the service is that when we get the comments from the people, why aren't you covering some of our replacement and more of our maintenance with our rates instead of special assessing them? That's the point behind doing this the right way, so that we can show people we're not just picking a number out of thin air. And this is to keep special assessments down on those items as we're able to put money away for the future.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful if we can do it. I think it makes sense, but I guess I was under the understanding that that wasn't allowable, or I don't think we've utilized much of that in the past. A couple more questions. What's the depreciation schedule on infrastructure items? How many years? You say we're about all depreciated out, but is it a 25 years, 30 years?
That really varies based on individual assets. So, your pipes are typically going to have a longer depreciation schedule versus your pumps or mechanical, electrical components within the system. So overall, we showed a nearly depreciated short-term asset list is what Ryan was describing. And that's for more your pump, mechanical, electrical components.
Even vehicles.
Yeah, vehicles, things like that within the system. Most of your pipes are going to be longer than that. I don't recall specifically if they were 30 or 50.
Right. That would be, I guess that might be a question for Jim. I don't recall off the top of my head either. Usually pipes are between 50 and 75, depending on the material, and that's based on GASB 34 depreciation.
That's not too important. I just, when you look at that and you say it's all depreciated out and you say, oh, wow, we really have to replace a whole lot of stuff. Well, not necessarily. It's certainly probably on some stuff. So I know it's just, it's a number, it's an operating expense. So.
And that's that's an important point, and I probably should have touched on that too. Just because something is depreciated out from an accounting standpoint doesn't mean that it doesn't have value to your system. And that's one reason, we were taking a longer look at how you can fund those reserves, is because we recognize that those assets, just because they might have been fully depreciated out on your books, are still in service and are still providing your residents with value.
Okay, another thing I guess I'm confused about is you say that we're going to charge by the meter size various rates, and my understanding is we have a flat rate for water, but it's for like the first 10,000 gallons, and then if you use more than that, and Tina, you can help me out here, Jim. It goes up proportionally as you use additional gallonage. So it's not just $7 for water. It goes up, and I guess I don't know what difference. Just because you have a bigger meter, the meter should be clicking. You've been putting the miles on as you use water. I don't, outside of maybe taxing the system a little bit because it's pulling more water through there. I don't understand how that plays as a variable in figuring out what you should charge them. I would think it's just actual gallons you use.
Commissioner Thorstead, our base fee right now for water is $7, and we charge $7 1,000, and we don't have any mechanism. We don't charge more or less. No matter what size of meter you have, we charge $7 flat fee, $7 1,000. So the important part, and I know Ryan and Sean can explain this far better than I can, but there is an additional cost when you get those larger meters. You have the higher usage. There is a greater cost to providing a service, and that is why it's proportionate to the size of a meter.
But you do charge for additional water. My water bill each month is $21 the last 4 months.
Yep. So it's $7 flat fee, and then $7 for each 1,000. So if you use 2,000 gallons, that's $21.
Right. So it's not a flat fee. We're not just charging $7 and you get all the water you want. So you are charging additional as the volume goes up.
No. Well, for each 1,000, you pay $7. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
If I use 10,000 or whatever, I'm going to pay a lot more than what I am paying. I guess he said that it's just a flat rate, and that's fine. As long as figured within the rate structures, it is beyond that. And the last thing, I maybe got two other questions here, is we talked about the sewer, and obviously we don't have metered sewer going out. But as we're sending water to Fargo, they have a meter that's going into their system. So they're going to know every gallon that's coming in, and we as a city are going to be paying for that. My concern is, and if you talk to our public works guys, they understand this, is in the spring, March and April, our system will get inundated, or in a heavy rain event gets inundated by people dumping into the sewer, their sumps and other things like that. Again, I don't worry so much about water in your lawn because they're going to pay for that again through usage. But how can we, or how do we account for those instances? Or do we have to tack into the rates a little bit of surcharge to cover that? Because unfortunately, we can't figure out who's doing it, and there's no meter on the sewer going out of a person's house to spread those rates out to those people that are putting that extra water in the system. I know there's an education process that goes with this, and we tried to do some of that this year, but we're gonna have to let people know that you can pump a lot of water with the sump real fast.
So Commissioner Thorstad, to the best of our ability, we did work through this study with your city engineer, and because Dustin was really there most of the time, and some of your public works staff too before Matt was on board. But we were looking at how much actual flow was going through the lagoons itself when we were projecting forward costs associated with future water sent to, or sewage sent to Fargo, correct? And so we have accounted for a larger amount of sewage that goes to Fargo than you would be billing for in your cost structure.
Okay, and last thing, and I'll shut up and let someone else talk here, but I know this will be further discussed, but we have to decommission our lagoons, and has any thought been to putting some of that expense into our rates, sewer rates somehow? I know Dustin said it's not a real cheap proposition to do, no matter which way we go. So I don't know if that's factored in or not, or if we're going to try to fund that some other way.
As we were working through that, we have a portion of, we were working with staff to really identify the most prudent way to go forward with incorporating the capital plan. And we do have a portion of the lagoon decommissioning kind of running through there, but through the rates. But a lot of it will be contingent on finding alternative revenue sources. And one of the main reasons for that, as and Dustin will kind of, when he presents his capital plan, but there are quite a bit of expenses that go along with that. And it's also, those expenses are somewhat contingent upon how you as a commission want to address and how quickly you want to address decommissioning those lagoons. And so at this point, it didn't seem that it was altogether equitable to put the fully loaded lagoon decommissioning into the sewer rate.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Thorstad. Any additional questions from commissioners?
I just have one, Mayor.
Please, Commissioner.
Thank you. Tina, I understand, and everybody understand the water rates, and I just looked at my bill. You do less than I do, Mike, by the way. I wish I could get it down. But having said that, it's $7 a month now. So just so I understand this, it would go to $7.25, correct? Is that, so it's 25 cents. So I'm not.
On the water, yeah.
Okay, so I'm not so concerned about that, but the one that does worry me quite a bit is the commercial one, if I'm understanding it, goes from $9 to $41. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
And why so much in 1 year? I mean, why such a big jump? Is that the one that's way behind, or?
I'll let them answer.
Thank you.
And I'm going to try to reshare my screen. It got off for some reason. So just to be clear, I did hear you say commercial, but it's actually the sewer rate that would go up. And that would be for somebody using 10,000 gallons a month. On the residential side, you would be capped on your sewer bill at $41 a month. If you use fewer gallons, as you see there on the top, closer to 4,000 gallons a month, it won't go up quite so much. It'll just depend on the usage, your water usage. But really, that is the sewer utility that is far behind your budgeted and your projected expenses. And, as Sean mentioned, it's a pretty new utility, as they used to be combined funds with the water and sewer. And so kind of the way I look at it, it's still kind of an infant or in its financial stages, right? And so it has the most growing up to do. And this is one of the hard parts of growing up, is readjusting your rate structure to be aligned with how you see costs within your utility.
Okay. So this is a good example because I actually used 4,000 gallons last month and my bill was $35 and my sewer was $9. So what you're saying here is if we agree to this next year, it would be the 35.25 and then probably the $25 added on to that rather than the $9, correct?
Correct.
Okay. That's all I got. Thanks.
I'd like to remind the commission that this is not an actionable item this evening. This report is just being presented to us, so we're not going to vote up or down on this. We're going to have time to study this. So just a reminder to the commissioners in case you weren't aware of that. Additional questions from the AE2S guys?
Tina, can you make sure that we get this PowerPoint?
I will do that. I will send it off to you so you have a chance to review it.
And in a printable format too. I want to be writing lots of notes.
Okay, for sure.
Thank
I'll
you.
put it in your mailboxes, actually, if you guys want a copy in your mailboxes as well.
Thank
I
you.
would like that, Tina, too. Thank you, my mailbox.
Yep, no problem.
Any other questions from the AE2S gentlemen? All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm
Thank you
sure
very
that
much
we'll
for
be
having us.
generating lots of other questions in the future.
And we will look forward to working with you and staff to be able to help answer those. And so I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight.
Thank you. Next
Sean and
order of
Ryan, would you
business on
send me the
regular-
newest one so that I have it for the commission?
Yes, we will make
Thanks very
sure.
much. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Next order of business is to discuss the neighborhood revitalization program and partnership with Gate City Bank. Call on Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Commission President. So this is a program that Larry Wow was running, and I'm sort of taking over for him now since he retired last week. But last year was the first year of the program with Gate City Bank. Essentially, the program allows for homeowners within West Fargo to apply for low interest loans for major home improvement projects. Brandy Haugen with Gate City Bank, she was sort of the person who helped Larry start this program last year. And she's here tonight to give you a brief overview of the program. Essentially, for the action item for tonight, all we're asking for you folks to do is to listen to her presentation and then just direct staff to continue our partnership with Gate City Bank if you feel it's appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, we're
If we
so
could,
excited to meet with you guys. I know we were supposed to meet the week of when everything happened with COVID-19. So we're excited to present to you guys today.
Brandy,
so
can I interrupt you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you rotate?
Am I sideways?
Yes,
Yeah.
here you are.
Oh my goodness. We're on a little tripod, so that might be why.
There you
Thank
go.
you.
Oh,
Very nice.
Awesome. We'll see. Hopefully you can see us both here. So I have Josh McAllister here. He is the personal loan officer here at West Fargo who took care of all of our customers last year that we partnered with. So essentially, we just wanted to thank you for having us and to launch the program and to see what questions you have. We had great success last year, and with that, we reviewed the program and we launched with $1 million set aside for you guys last year, and we're looking to launch $2 million this year based off of how well the program went last year. And excited to continue our relationship. I know I visit with several individuals throughout the community throughout the year, and I love our partnership. I think it's a great opportunity to invest in our community and to keep those neighborhoods alive. So just opening it up for questions to see what you guys have for us today.
Thank you, Ms. Haugen. Questions from the commissioners?
How well
Or
did it
staff?
go last?
Commissioner Simmons?
Thank you, Mayor. How well did it go last year? Like, did you go through the funds and give us a little,
Half of it.
Yeah, so we used about half of the funds, and with that, I would say there wasn't too much marketing with it. It was more word of mouth. So we were very happy with how much we did. Normally, when we launch a program, we don't even use half of the funds. But we visited. I want to say it was back in January or February with Larry, and went over the numbers, and he was very happy with how we did with the numbers. And so we decided that we were going to set aside $2 million because we feel that with it being the second year, we wanted to do a little bit more marketing of the program. So we actually have a door hanger that we have created that has all of the information on the door hanger with the rates, the terms, how to contact us to apply for the program. And we feel with doing that, we should definitely reach the 2 million goal. So we want to make sure everyone's aware of it and can take advantage of the program. So
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? No? Commissioner Olson?
No, I didn't have a question, but I'll make the motion. Do we direct the staff to continue working with this partnership?
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Judith seconds, but moved and seconded to direct staff to continue with the Neighborhood Revitalization Program partnership with Gate City Bank for the year. Is there any discussion?
Oh, just thanks to Gate City for helping out with this program. Appreciate it.
thank you.
Please give our thanks to Mr. Hanson and Mr. Swantek. It was under Mr. Swantek's leadership that first approached me on this, and we look forward to working with Mr. Hanson as well, and Mr. Swantek both, and of course you two. We're very grateful for your participation in our community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. We appreciate you so much.
All right. Any further discussion? We'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you again very much, Gate City.
Thank you.
Item number 3 is to review the development agreement for the TIF district at 2020-1. Mr. Solberg.
Actually, that should be under my name. That was switched. But
Mrs. Fisk.
why, thank you. Thank you, President Dardis. This agreement is just the culmination of the TIF that we had brought forward to you as a commission some time back, and then we brought it to the county and the school, and they had overwhelming support for the TIF district itself. And so the development agreement here just lays out the facts and how things will work. It's more our protection on what we're going to get for the TIF district and so on and so forth, and then what the developer is required to do. As staff, we went through it. I visited with Lauren and Tim again today about it. We saw some areas that we might want to fine tune, but what we thought was that a separate agreement, once this is approved and the parking starts to get built, create a separate agreement that outlines all the different little nuances, like if they're responsible to maintain it per this agreement. If they don't maintain it and we end up having to go in there, how we would get reimbursed for those funds. As well as Tim had made the comment, we need to verify the number of spots so that the number of spots can't change at some point. Different things like that. And John might be able to comment on that, but we had thought about it and thought we should stick everything in here and then question if there shouldn't be a separate agreement. One of the questions I got from a commissioner was, what about advertising? And I said, this doesn't allow for advertising. in that space because it's a different type of agreement. It's a different type of parking. With that muddled mess that I just gave you, I will let Tim's the expert on why this is such an awesome benefit for the entire downtown area. And Lauren is here as well. And Jim's got the finance numbers. So we're all here for you.
Tina, if perhaps I could add a little finer point on the agreement. You had raised the question today about the specifics regarding the use of the parking spots. That will be addressed by a separate purchase agreement for the lot. So they are condoing out floors 2, 3, and 4. The reason that we did not address those specifics in this agreement is this is the tax increment financing agreement. Those specifics regarding what you as the owner of those parking stalls want need to be covered in the agreement to purchase those 3 floors and to use those floors. So it'll be a combination of a purchase and a management agreement. And at this point, I don't think we have enough specifics on what the final design will look like, how many parking spots will be allocated. And so that's why those sections are somewhat not as clear, because the concept is we need to have a second agreement to cover the actual purchase. And you as the owner have control over that because you won't make the payment until you get everything in the agreement regarding the purchase and the management.
So rather than remove this from tonight's agenda, you want to add a second document, Mr. Shockley?
Well, we wouldn't be able to add the document tonight or probably for a while until we have the specifics on the number of parking spots.
The number of parking spots, okay.
Yeah, and some of those other details to be worked out. The TIF agreement is pretty straightforward. And him or Jim can probably comment on the actual financing, but we tried to separate out, or I tried to separate out within the agreement, just keeping it as a financing agreement for the overall TIF rather than getting into the construction of what you as the owner wanted, just because it's still a year or two away from construction.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Questions for Mr. Shockley or Mrs. Fisk? Commissioner Jerdevig.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. This will be different than the ramp at the lights where we are paying a management / maintenance fee annually. This will be taken care of by the building owner, not, right?
Correct. Via this agreement, unless, John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they're required to maintain it. They're required to maintain it, and it doesn't allow any option for advertising.
Correct, and we'll further define what major maintenance is and what minor maintenance is, and how we take care of those issues. Those of you who have purchased condos are probably familiar with CAMs and those sorts of issues. There's some detail that needs to be worked out in that purchase agreement, along with how they set up their condo documents. And so we're going to want to see the condo documents that they develop to make sure that we're not getting any costs passed on to us, because we'll essentially be the owner of those 3 floors. And so as a condo owner, you want to limit your liability for any unexpected costs or maintenance.
Commissioner Olson.
So what we're going to approve tonight, if we approve it, is basically how that 1 floor of parking structure is going to be financed through the TIF, correct?
You're approving an overall TIF agreement for the entire development. That's a 15-year TIF. It is, part of it is getting 3 floors of parking, levels 2, 3, and 4. And that's the TIF. TIF funding will be utilized to help offset those costs. So think of it as a bucket of money. The TIF money will go into a bucket along with contributions from the developer, basically an offset of the purchase cost, and then some economic development funds from the sales tax. That'll be your purchase price we will put together a purchase agreement after we see the condo documents, along with a maintenance agreement to make sure that we're not obligated for any maintenance. There may be a question about striping and some insurance issues that we have to work through, but that'll all be taken care of in the purchase agreement and management agreement.
Thank you.
Additional questions for Mr. Shockley or Mrs. Fisk?
If there aren't, I'll make a motion to approve.
Commissioner Simmons moves to the development agreement of the District of 2020-1. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Thorstead seconds. Been moved and seconded that we approve the development agreement for the TIF District 2020-1. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Aye. Motion carries. Next order of business is the review of the petition for improvements for Westport Investments, LLC for the Wilds 20th edition. Mr. Scott.
Well, thank you, Commission President Durdes and members of the commission. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Okay, give me a second here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so before you tonight is a petition for improvements from the developer Westport Investments, LLC. They have requested improvements to serve the future platted area, currently proposed as Wilds 20th edition, which is located towards the south end of the Wilds development that is south of 52nd Avenue. So abutting the city of Horace boundary. Included in your packet is the actual signed petition where they are again requesting that the city extend municipal utilities, streets, sidewalks, and streetlights to service the development. Along with their signed petition, they have provided title opinion and the warranty deed confirming that they are the legal owner of the property. And so tonight, I am requesting that you direct me as the city engineer to evaluate the infrastructure needs, which will help determine what type of an improvement district to create, how size or how large to size this district. Then also direct me as the city engineer to prepare and execute a task order in accordance with our MSA with More Engineering for preliminary engineering and survey services. So back to this map, just want to let you know that a few of the things that strike me as I look at it initially, this is along our collector roadway here, 9th Street West. Currently, 9th Street West terminates right on the, basically at the start of this plat where I'm moving my cursor here on the screen. And so I believe the developer is proposing that we could, or they're hoping that we would extend improvements into here, but hold off on paving 9th Street. And at this point, we're going to evaluate that. That's part of what we're asking tonight, is just to move forward with evaluating infrastructure needs. But my initial opinion is that 9th Street's going to have to continue further south, which would then be a regional improvement. And if you recall, when we've done other phases throughout this development of extending 9th Street, a regional collector roadway like that, usually the assessment district is going to have a boundary. In some cases, we go a mile or a half a mile each way, but in this case, we've included all of the property south of 52nd Avenue that I'm highlighting here. So we have that to consider. And then also in previous developments, there were some requirements that the developer worked with Horace to basically construct a form of a roadway, gravel surface at the very minimum down to 64th Avenue. And Tim can kind of elaborate on some of those requirements as they were spelled out in previous subdivision agreements. But so those are some of the things that we need to consider with this petition and really hone in on what we are going to move forward with before I can even draw in an assessment boundary. I believe the developer is proposing that the assessment boundary only encapsulate what they are proposing the Wild's 20th edition to be. But again, if we are going to move forward with extending 9th Street West, that will require a boundary that will include all of the properties in this South Wilds development. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for questions from the commission.
Commissioners, questions for Mr. Scott?
Yeah, Dustin,
Yes, sir.
why, I guess I understand the right of way 9th Street. We definitely, we got to figure that out. But why in the world would we make a developer go south of our own territorial into Horace and make them pay for a gravel road there? Why, what's that all about?
Well, I'll do my best to answer that. I might rely on Tim for some of the plat history, but as soon as my understanding is as soon as they started platting the Wild 7th edition was the first phase 4 or 5 years ago, there was discussion on how are we going to provide an ingress egress throughout this development, recognizing right away that the concern being we would have a collector road here dead end at the south limits of our jurisdiction. And so right away there was a clause put in the subdivision agreement is probably the best way I can say it, that the developer needed to coordinate this road with the city of Forest. And it's been in subsequent phases. So the Wild's 8th edition, 9th edition, the 11th edition are all the major platted development phases that included city infrastructure. Each one of those subdivision agreements had mention on this connection through to 64th. And again, not necessarily forcing an improved surface, but it had to be at least a gravel roadway, so that, for emergency services, so on and so forth, the ability to get in and out of this area versus just 52nd Avenue. So, and I know in previous conversations with the city of Horace, they would certainly prefer more of an improved surface like a concrete roadway, but again, I would leave some of the details to what was specifically required in those developers agreements to Mr. Solberg.
Mr. President, can I answer a little bit of that question?
Mr. Solberg.
Thank you. So the specific language in the agreements dating back to Wild 7th and then also reiterated on 8th and 9th states that the intention of the city of Horace to make improvements to 78th Street and 79th Street were there. And those are the extension of 9th Street West in West Fargo. It says the developer will work with the city of Horace to establish a schedule for constructing the streets, which will be coordinated with the development of the Wilds development. If the city of Horace fails to make improvements, the developer will be responsible for the cost of developing rural section gravel roadways to ensure access to 64th Avenue South. Commissioner Simmons, I don't disagree. It's difficult to require a developer to develop a roadway within another city. When we looked at this initially, if we track back some of our agreements and approvals, the amount of homes that were within this potential subdivision could be reaching 1,000 units. And so with many of them potentially, needing more than one way out, we were first initially concerned about emergency access. That quickly changed to concern with those people that are living within there, traveling southbound to the new high school and new middle school. So that was kind of held strong within there because of not only emergency access, but then also access to the south to where they likely would go down to the high school. So.
Thank you, Mr. Solberg. Any questions for Mr. Solberg? There's been additional land purchased down by Greyhawk also by potential developers. I've had 2 conversations with the mayor of Horace, Mr. Peterson, with regard to 64th. There's not been any conclusions that, he's asked me, I knew from conversations with Mr. Solberg that was part of the agreement initially of the other developments, is that 64th had to endure some type of improvement. And so I've had conversations with Mayor Peterson, just so everybody knows. And that discussion is still ongoing with the city of Horace and the developer. That's my understanding.
So tonight, you're just asking to move forward with the study, right, Dustin?
Yeah, we're not creating an improvement district this evening. The only thing we're doing is directing engineering to evaluate the infrastructure needs, then create the necessary the information for that district, and then the city commission is directing him also, engineering, to execute a task order for more engineering. But we do have to be a little more definitive, and I'm going to turn it back to Mr. Scott as to what is inclusive in that task order, a little more direction from us. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the commission, yes, good question. So the task order with more engineering that we will set up will only consist of the scope to basically put this initial, call it study phase, if you will, together. But there's other, there's basically some preliminary engineering work that gets done. So we start looking at what are the infrastructure needs going to be. Some of the obvious ones are, we're going to need the local sewer, water, storm sewer mains in the streets. So we establish an initial task order that does not include the full design and construction services. It'll be the services to put together the preliminary engineering, so our initial layouts, along with starting some cost estimates, and again, the initial phases of a report that will eventually end up, if we move forward after this initial work, our next step would be to create an improvement district. And then you would also at that point direct the city engineer to prepare a formal engineer's report. But until I can actually bring an improvement district to you, I need to do some initial work. And that's what really this task order is set the stage for. How many hours do we think we need to put into putting some preliminary engineering so that we have more information to bring forward in the subsequent meetings? In the past, we also will include right away some time and effort to prepare the engineer's report. Now, that's the document by which it explains all of the improvements that are going to be designed and constructed. That's where we have our initial engineering estimates, and we also provide an initial report on how the special assessments would shake out. So it's really just those initial phases, and I'm thinking it's in the previous developments of similar size and nature, it's been around $10,000 plus or minus. Again, the intent is just to get us to a point where we're at the engineer's report, if you will. Once the engineer's report's approved, then we will, of course, engage in an additional task order. We will amend the task order now to then, at that point, to include the full design and construction services, which is traditionally done at the 11% of the total construction cost.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Mr. President.
Mr. Solberg, yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. So just to cap that off, typically when we bring forward the final plat, it comes sort of in unison with the improvement district. I think what the city engineer is trying to make sure you understand is that there's a lot of preliminary engineering that has not been done yet that he's being asked to do. And when that comes forward along with the final plat, and the city of Horace attends that meeting and asks for that road to be done, as was directed in our previous agreements, what will the commission's response be? And that might affect how the developer moves forward or doesn't move forward. There's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done, as well as a tremendous amount of cost. And we want to ensure that you understand that That comes together with the plat. The plat would need to get approved. A lot of that preliminary engineering is then already done by both our city engineer, just from time and resources, as well as that task order that's used to pay more engineering to help create this improvement district for this developer for more homes.
Mr. Soberg, I would hope that you could forward us that language of the previous developments of exactly how that is, so we have it, as a resource. And if that the same developer did the previous one, that's asking to do this one. So if that agreement was signed, I would hope that that would be kind of a bond right there. But let's get that in our hands so we can review it, Tim.
Thank you, Mr. President. It certainly is. However, there's been no movement, no action on that. There has not been discussions with Horace, and Horace has not been clear as to what they're going to ask for. So I'll provide it to you, but in some instance, we really want the developer to do the legwork. Asking staff to do the legwork for them and have conversations with Horace isn't in our best interest, I don't think.
All right, Mr. Soberg, then would you please direct a letter to the developer with that request on behalf of the commission?
Absolutely.
Tim, Mr. Mayor, from
Commissioner Simmons.
thank you, Mayor. From my understanding, Tim, that the developer has had conversations and they can't come to an agreement. Are you aware of any of that?
Well, I know
Commissioner, go ahead.
it's more than a gravel road. But that's where we want them, if it's in an agreement, we want them to have something, either this is what we're going to do and that's it, or we're willing to work with Horace and here's our plan to do that. To leave it on city staff's hands is what has been our struggle and why we're not moving forward with this, because simply
I'd have a suggestion. My suggestion would be our city administrator and myself call the city administrator and Horace and their mayor. We'll do a virtual conference call and we'll have a discussion about that. Is that acceptable, Mr. Soberg, or should Mrs. Fisk and I be out of that and you and the city engineer be doing that conversation?
I'd love for you guys to do it.
All right, Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Simmons.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I believe the developer's on here now. You may want to at least address us.
I don't see him on my...
I see him on my screen. He's down. Mr. Jim Bullis is in the down right-hand corner. He's waving. So
He's
Melissa, can you?
Oh, there he is. Okay. He just popped up to mine too.
Yep, I just want to make a note. Mr. Bullis is on the call, but Commissioner Olson's internet just disconnected. So he is calling in and I'm going to patch him through. So you could just hold 1 second, Mr. Bullis, before speaking so we can make sure that Commissioner Olson is. Commissioner Olson, are you there?
Yes, I'm on the phone.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Go ahead, guys.
We'll call him Mr. Bullis at this time.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Fantastic. Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, a couple things. First, I sat down with Tim and Tina and members of the city of Horace last year at West Fargo City Hall to talk about this road. The long and the short of it is they want a bigger road than we agreed to provide. And Mayor Dardis, it's probably time that you have that conversation with the mayor of Horace and we resolve this.
So your agreement with the city of Horace, Mr. Bullis, was a gravel improved road and not curb and gutter and concrete or asphalt?
Yeah, correct. And in fact, and it doesn't say at least a gravel road. It says a gravel surface road.
Okay.
Rural section. And that's what we agreed to because a deal's a deal. We stand ready to do that. But Horace is frankly, dragging their feet so that, to try and get more here. Our improvement request was made some time ago and I asked Dustin recently to amend it just to include the lots so we don't have to address 9th Street yet. And I did that because, Mayor, when you talk to him, if we don't put 9th Street in, putting up the screen, I apologize, I can't move a cursor. The reason I changed my request, Dustin, was so that if the mayor and members of Horace decide to move that road to the west to accommodate the landowner or whatever, then at least we still have that flexibility. And, Dustin, I think, or Tim, John had done a version where it shoves the 9th Street west of the paddocks and the stables that the Ingsteds had. So,
Commissioner President, if I may.
Excuse me, Dustin, could you scroll up just a hair?
Commissioner President, can I make a
please,
comment?
Mrs. Fisk. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. I remember those meetings, we talked about that quite a bit. And one of the concerns as a city administrator is that if we're going to have him move that road, or if we're going to have them make them do anything greater than a gravel surface, you're going to be charging people within the city of West Fargo for improvements that are going to benefit the city of Horace. So in other words, our taxpayers will be paying for their improvement. And I have a problem with that. And that was my concern when we talked about moving the road.
Explain that, Mrs. Fisk, because is not the yellow line on the south border the border of West Fargo?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so if 9th Street gets moved because of an easement or horse barns or whatever out there, from the existing straight two black lines, where would that go?
It'll kind of curve around, wasn't it kind of going to curve around that square, that rectangle and come down at that tree line? Wasn't that it, Mr. Bullis?
I think, yes, City Administrator Fisk, it was going to kind of curve around, so you went to the tree line to the west, and that way it was less invasive. And from our standpoint, we're willing to help in that regard, and that's why I left out why I suggested here at the last minute that Dustin just pull 9th Street from our request. That way we can address it for the winter whenever Horace wants to come to the table, or whenever
Mr.
we
Bullis, if I may, Mr. President.
Mr. Scott.
So for me, the whether or not the extension of 9th Street occurs because of the Horace agreement or not, I'm a little uncomfortable moving forward with this entire area being platted and built upon without 9th Street coming in here to give it additional access points. And so whether or not 9th needs to come down to 64th Avenue today is still yet to be determined. But even if it isn't, and the commission is fine with not getting it down to 64th, I believe that this area, and again, this is part of the problem. We need to sit down and collectively think through this and analyze this further. But I'm at this point, at first look, I'm uncomfortable that 9th Street dead ends here. And now we're going to have, I don't know how many lots are in this plat, but I will pull up the initial preliminary plat. And again, with this many phases, or with this many lots in here, having 9th Street dead end up here, that's a lot of construction activity to build all those homes. And then once they're in place, if it takes another 5 years to resolve this 9th Street issue, that's a lot of density in there, relying upon our local street system to the north. And if anything, we would certainly make sure that this is connected here. But again, that's what needs to get evaluated. And so to just blindly run forward and create an assessment district that only encompasses the Wilds 20th edition, I think it's just too premature to do that without further analysis.
Well, Mr. Bullis?
And commissioners, the unfortunate part is that, we have some economic realities here in that if we don't get improvements this spring or summer, I have no way to, this is how we make money at this development. And this is, we've been sitting on this, pondering this for so long. Here we are at the construction season. And, I've got to get some inventory in the ground. And, we've been doing this for a lot of years and this isn't that complicated. And, if we had to come straight from the existing utilities and make one loop so I can get 50 lots for sale, I'm in a bad way here. And it's frankly because we keep worrying about what Horace wants. And, I don't know that West Fargo is concerned. And if it's a matter of the $10,000 or $20,000 or whatever it is that Moore needs to start making the improvements, Westport will pay for it. We will promise to pay for this. We'll pay it in advance, whatever. I've got to have those lots. And the only way I can get them is if we get moving a whole lot faster on engineers, on a district engineers report and a request for improvements, and see how fast we can bid this. And that's, I'm trying to tailor this down.
Well, Mr. Willis, I have to agree with Mr. Scott that 9th Street, I think that improvement has to be made. I would suggest that you rescind your other directive to them that 9th Street has to be finished at least to 64th. I agree with Mr. Scott on that.
And Your Honor, I'm okay doing that as long as the city doesn't want to talk to them about moving it. If West Fargo is okay with leaving it where it's at, we'll leave it where it's at. We're okay with building it.
I'll have to defer to Mr. Scott and Mr. Solberg on that.
Mr. President, I was made aware from the
Okay, Mr. Scott.
Sorry.
I just wanted to reiterate that I'm not necessarily saying that the 9th Street needs to connect to 64th with this improvement, but I think it needs to get further from where it is today, which is right at the end of Wild's 9th here. It needs to come down to get to the other connection points of this plat, and I'll pull up the plat. So I'm saying 9th Street should really at least come down past this proposed access point in here, so that all of this density here has another ingress egress out onto a collector roadway versus sending all of that traffic up through the local roads to the north, which again is not just the traffic that's there when it's all built out. It's all of the construction traffic that needs to come down into here and improve these lots. So again, the 64th Avenue conversation still needs to take place, and we need to figure that out. But I'm saying at a very minimum, with the improvements into this development, we should extend 9th from Deb Drive West up here all the way down to this additional Deb Drive West that's shown here. And
thank you for
doing so,
clarifying.
that to me is going to be a regional assessment district, not just a district confined by the bounds of this proposed 20th edition.
You've clarified what I meant to say. Thank you, Dustin.
Absolutely.
Any other discussion, questions for Mr. Bullis?
Mayor?
Yes, Commissioner Simmons.
So Mr. Bullis, I'm pretty much assuming that you don't want to pay for all that with those 100 homes. That needs to be regional, correct?
Yeah, that would need to be regional. Yeah, that's correct. So I guess we could put this on the slow boat and hope that, I guess.
The problem is you're asking to get homes in. And that's not going to happen, right? On the slow boat?
That won't happen this year. I mean, if we want to extend 9th Street, it most likely will not happen this year. Dustin, I mean, what do you think? Is there any hope of getting all those improvements in?
Well, what's transpired over the last couple of years, and you recall this when we did the Wilds 11th edition, when we did the Wilds 11th edition, which was last spring, we were bidding this project out. This improvement district here, because it included some regional components, the commission had directed us to schedule neighborhood meetings to inform the neighborhoods that there's another assessment district coming. So, where in years past, these things were able to move faster, these things don't move as fast. Our engineer's report is no longer a one paragraph page with a cost estimate on the back. It's a full-blown report. And it includes a couple options on how we may spread the assessments. And then it also, again, starts to include things like public outreach when there is potentially another assessment district coming for the people that are living up to the north. So, if the commission directs us to move forward today, the next meeting we could potentially come with a proposed improvement district. But at that particular meeting, I would foresee the commission, at least in being consistent with what they directed staff last year, is that next meeting, then they'll direct us to schedule a neighborhood meeting to inform the public. And again, we can keep things progressing, but I would say that, it would probably be towards the end of June before anything is getting bid, which still gives time to start construction this year. But in terms of being able to start building houses this year, it's too early to tell. I would say that's more likely unlikely, but maybe there's a block that we could get done. I don't know. And again, it would depend upon how the commission continues to evaluate this in future meetings.
Commissioners, any other comments? Mr. Bullis, any question? Comment?
Again, this is going to leave the wilds with no lots, in next year to sell. It's going to leave us with zero inventory, and that'll be reflected in your building permits. But we are stone cold out of inventory, and 9th Street, whether people like it or not, if we could have all the public hearings we want to have, but either the city's going to build it or it's not. I mean, assessing it, we're going to assess it to the wilds, so I don't know what we're going to get out of a bunch of public hearings. And I don't, I would literally beg this commission to fast track this so we can get this stuff installed this year. And otherwise, this is a serious economic hardship for this developer, and it doesn't need to be. This didn't need to happen.
Is Mr. Mayor?
Commissioner Simmons.
Is the staff recommendation still to move forward with this, though, to make a vote? I guess, regardless of we need to still look into this. Do the analysis, correct, Dustin?
That's correct, Commissioner Simmons. And yes, to answer your question, I am still recommending that the commission direct me to prepare a task order with more engineering, and again, evaluate these infrastructure needs. This is going to take a couple meetings with other staff, other departments, likely the developer, and after that, the fruition of that work, we will be able to establish what we feel is the right assessment district boundary, and then bring forward the actual district itself at the next meeting. And so, and even at that meeting, we may be able to bring, depending on how much can get done within the next 2 weeks, we might be able to bring some rough cost estimates, but I don't foresee us bringing a full-blown engineer's report, because again, that is a significant document. And I would say there's probably options too. There were a couple other developments last year where the commission, instead of having a full-blown neighborhood meeting, just sending out letters to inform the neighborhoods and giving them a chance to call in with their questions. But again, those things are going to be discussed at future meetings. And so at this point, again, just requesting that the city commission keep this project moving forward. And the first step, in my opinion, was to evaluate this infrastructure need out here, because again, there's such uncertainty with 9th Street and whether or not it goes down to 64th. We still need to even figure out whether or not it needs to be extended at all. And that's
okay. If there are no other questions, I would make the motion to move forward with this, Mayor.
We have a motion by Commissioner Simmons. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Thorstead seconds. Been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Questions of the developer or Mr. Scott or Mr. Sober? Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next order of business is item number 5, a second reading of the ordinance number 1155. Mr. Shockley.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the West Fargo City Commission. Before you have the second reading of ordinance number 1155. There has been a short time period between the first and second reading. The first reading occurred just slightly prior to the COVID-19 issues, and as everybody on the commission knows, the commission, along with staff's attention, have been focused on dealing with the COVID-19 issues. As we've settled into more of a regular routine, we wanted to get the second reading of this ordinance completed. This is really a cleanup ordinance dealing with a number of various issues that are a result of either statutory changes or just cleanups in the code. For instance, changing invasive species and insects, restraints, child restraints, and also looking at the drug paraphernalia and tobacco products, emergency vehicles. So it's a lot of cleanups. There's been no changes between the first and second reading.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Any questions for Mr. Shockley? All right, commissioners, your thoughts?
Make a motion to
Second reading.
I have Commissioner Thorstad making the motion. Commissioner Simmons is seconding that we approve the second reading of ordinance 1155. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 6 is Commissioner Olson, and he'd like to discuss with us the current truck routes, review and discuss the current truck routes. Commissioner Olson.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm back on the Zoom meeting if you haven't figured that out.
There you are.
Yeah. With the removal of Cheyenne Street north of 13th Avenue to Main Avenue, there's been some local businesses that have approached me about looking at another north-south route in that core area of town. And this is just being brought up for discussion. If you want to pursue this any further or just leave it as it is. Right now, to travel north from 13th Avenue on a truck route, you'd have to go over to 45th Street and go north. Or you'd have to actually go down to I-94 and then travel out to the northwest and get on Main and then to get back up. So with the loss of Cheyenne Street, that causes some problems, but for the most part, people are dealing with it, and there's some that just aren't. So we've had a group discussion, and before we proceeded any further, we thought we'd just get the commissioners' input on that. One option would be to use 9th Street from 13th Avenue to Main Avenue. There's some concerns there because of a high school, but if you look at what on 9th Street with current and all the way down into Veterans, there's 3 other schools along there. There is residential between 13th Avenue and Main Avenue, but there's also residential between 13th Avenue and Interstate. The other option would be to go out to the fairgrounds, be 15th Street and go down to 13th Avenue. But 13th Avenue west of Cheyenne Street causes problems because it's not constructed for a truck route at the point. The other option would be to look at Cheyenne Street again. But with the road diet that's being scheduled, I don't know how that would work. And then the other option would be just leave it the way it is. So before we got too far involved, I just thought it'd be worth our time to hear what the other commissioners have to think about this, and if we need to proceed further on it.
Mr. President?
Mr. Shockley.
Just for the commission's information, changing it, you'll recall the city commission had changed the ordinance so that truck route adjustments can be made by resolution of the city commission. So all that would be needed if you should decide to change the truck routes would be a modification of the existing resolution. So it doesn't involve 2 readings.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Commissioners, discussion?
Question.
Mr. Commissioner Olson's, Mr. Thorstad.
Dustin, 9th Street East, which most of the housing along there doesn't empty onto 9th Street. It just backs up to it or is adjacent to it. But that pavement, it seems like it's concrete all the way up to Main. Is that pavement better suited to support some truck traffic? If if there's certain weight limits on it.
No, that concrete section from 13th Avenue to Main Avenue is a full concrete section, typical of our other arterial roadways. So I don't believe it's a weight limit issue there. Again, I think and my history on the matter is a little bit unclear, but I believe it was more so relating to the fact that there was the high school and the residential so close to that corridor, which is why it has not been a truck route for so many years.
Yeah, the only thing along that route is the residential. I can't think of any properties that actually empty out onto 9th. They're on side streets or they're facing the opposite direction.
That is correct, Commissioner Thorsted, yes.
And I guess, Brad, are the people, is there anyone specifically that's been asking? I mean, when we first took Cheyenne Street off, I know the ready-mix companies, concrete companies were the ones complaining the most at that time because of all the development on the south side of West Fargo. And their plants are kind of straight north or, right up Center Street. Is it a specific group of them that are asking this, or is it just a general discussion? We knew we ended up with a kind of a tough area, and the discussion was the Fairground Road some year down the road, if we could ever, get the overpass over the interstate there. That was one of our dreams. Then you could hook into like Christensen Drive or some other road out in that area. But that would be a long-term hope, because the 13th Avenue West, as you noted, that goes right through the parks, and that's a really narrow and lightweight road. So I don't think that would accommodate any kind of traffic. But I guess the question is there, I know initially, and Commissioner Simmons remembers this, we had a lot of complaints from especially the ready-mix type people, because they were running back and forth to jobs. And personally, I think taking them off Cheyenne Street was a good move. They used to really zip down there with high speeds and trying to get to and from jobs. So I don't know if there's anyone specifically that's concerned about it. The only one in my mind on the north side here and living kind of close to it would be 9th Street East. But if you did that, I think you could, there have to be limits, I think, on the types of trucks you allow. Or for instance, I wouldn't want to see a truck with pups, pulling 2 trailers and put some size limits on it. But just in general, if you can let us know if anyone particular has been complaining.
Well, we've had one person, and I can't remember the owner of the business, but it's Curb Design. It is a cement-related type business, but that's the one. But this, he said that there's lots of other contractors that would. He said he could fill up the chambers if given notice.
Yeah, now, John, can you clarify this? I thought they were allowed to go to a job site, like, for instance, Curb Design. If he's going to or from a job site, to set up his equipment and stuff, he's allowed to go on a non-truck route. Is that correct? But he can't just drive around willy-nilly or park on the streets or do whatever.
That is correct. Deliveries to and from a specific job site, and that includes residential deliveries for semis delivering products, could go directly to the site, but they can't use it as a routine truck route.
Well, I think I've lost you guys again.
God dang it. Commissioner or Mayor Dartis.
Commissioner Simmons.
Thank you. Commissioner Olson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, I don't want to get into the old days, but I was the street commissioner for 14 years. And we went through this heavily. Commissioner Thorsted will know this. When we decided to take it off Cheyenne Street, we basically had the people up north, the concrete people. And I actually met with every one of them, every company, and they did their own analysis. And when they got their analysis done, they had determined it was actually cheaper because of stop times and fuel to go around than it was to go down Cheyenne. Now, I also had meetings with some of the, I'll call them accessory companies, for lack of a better word, third-party companies. And they're allowed, and curb design, I believe, was one of them. They're allowed to use that route, John, Mr. Shockley, as long, depending upon their truck size. And if I recall, some of these people, their truck size was within the limits that they could use that road. And we've always said anybody can use the road if they're going to a project or going, delivering to a business. So, I mean, I would highly recommend, Commissioner Olson, that we do not touch Cheyenne Street. As far as 13th or 9th Street is considered, and Commissioner Thorsten, again, I'll rely to your memory a little bit, but that street, I'm not objecting to that one. There was only one commissioner at the time. We had these conversations that didn't want it to go by the high school, but yet you're absolutely right. It goes by three elementary schools, so it doesn't. Other than they're driving at the high school is the only concern I would have, with vehicles. But I would highly recommend we do not touch Cheyenne Street at this venture. I mean, we did a lot to get out of that.
Well, I agree, Commissioner Simmons, with not letting it go back to Cheyenne Street. I was just laying out different options.
Right. Yep. Nope. That's great.
That was my only purpose of mentioning that. And like I said before, we don't have to do anything. We can just leave it as it is. I just wanted to hear your guys' input and that. And I don't know if Interim Chief Boyer, if you want to make any comments about this because of the truck enforcement, and that. So if you want to just help me out here.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson, Commissioner President Dardis, and everybody, all the other commissioners. So this has come up through some conversations that we've had with our snow removal companies, trying to formulate plans for next year. It's been brought up off and on for many of the other companies in town that we've talked with, as far as having a truck route available for them between Mann Avenue and 13th Avenue. As far as 9th Street goes, with some of those residents, they may not exit right onto that roadway, and having the high school there, we had discussed, and we had kind of met briefly with Commissioner Olson about the possibility of, do we do maybe no hazmat in that portion of the truck route, if that were to become one, or what are the other options that are available to make sure that we're not hindering our businesses. There are trucks that go down that road to deliver to the high school and those things. So we just want to make sure that we're thinking of all the options that are available at this time.
What, Chief, what are the snow removal people? What are their concerns?
Some of the equipment that they may have, when they're leaving in the morning, if they're plowing on the way out, they can drive down that roadway, but technically on the way back, then at the end of their day, they can't come back through that area. So our truck reg officer will make stops on that road quite frequently when he's out and about for trucks that are using that as a cut across. Some people, they just simply don't know the way of getting around that, and there's some education that happens there. But for a lot of the smaller companies, once they put that sign on the side of their door, it's a commercial vehicle, and if it's over 26,001 pounds, then it's a truck. So they can't be on that road. So it kind of paints us into a little bit of a corner there.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I'm not advocating one way or the other. I just wanted to bring it before you to want to know if we should continue looking at another truck route for that area or just leave it as it is.
Well, it's certainly worthy of a discussion. So how about if we give it maybe next commission meeting, we take it back up once we've all had a little chance to review the possibilities. Is that acceptable to the commissioners?
And again, thank you, Commissioner Olson, for bringing this forward, because you're right. We should talk about it, Mayor. And I'll just remind the current commission, again, there was only one commissioner, and he's a great commissioner, so there's nothing with that. But that was against the 9th Street. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. If that's something, Commissioner Olson, we could work out, I'm not opposed to that one. So maybe that would work. I don't know a solution, I guess. That's your job now.
Yeah, and if we're going to do that again, if we put certain amount of limitations on there, be it size, length of vehicle, or like say hazardous materials or something like that, heck, I only live a couple blocks from it. I don't see it being a big issue. We widened it out on a good chunk of it here just a couple years ago. So I think that would be the only one I would consider north of 13th. I certainly wouldn't advocate for Cheyenne or anywhere else.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Next item of business is number 7, construction updates. Dustin, you have anything for us?
Yes, thank you again, Commission President Dardis, members of the commission. I'll be brief tonight. I did want to share, before I get into the actual construction projects, I wanted to share just a brief update on our downtown Cheyenne Street road diet project. We, of course, had our public input meeting. It was a virtual meeting that we had the information on our website for 2 weeks. The public comments, the public comment period closed on April 21st. So over the last couple weeks, More Engineering's been organizing all those comments and basically preparing responses. We're also putting the final touches on our categorical exclusion document. It's basically the environmental document that needs to be approved before the DOT will move forward with final design plans and so on and so forth. So at this point, we are going to be submitting that document before May 15th. I would hope that it's by the end of the week here, but May 15th is our deadline, and we will certainly make that. So in the June, likely the first meeting is where I will bring forward the initial, or call it a preliminary engineering report, and also an improvement district map, where we will then talk about creating an improvement district to help partially fund this project. So that, and then all of the right-of-way, we again are still working pretty heavily with Moore and Onstead Twitchell on all of our right-of-way needs to get that project done. So everything's forward. We're looking good. And just a reminder that we are scheduled to bid that project October 16th. So for 2021 construction. As far as construction projects, a lot of coordination in the last couple of weeks with Melissa and her team to keep the notifications going out when we are shutting down lanes, reducing traffic, any impacts in terms of transportation. We are certainly trying to stay ahead of keeping those communication chains open and getting the press releases out. Our water distribution project, the big project where we're putting water main around the west side of town, but also on 9th Street Northeast. We're about 80% done with that project, give or take. And again, that project has required 15th Street Northwest to be closed. We should end up by the end of the week, I think, if not early next week. We also had some closures up on 9th Street Northeast. So, but that project has been going pretty well spring. And then, of course, we've got some of the development projects. The one I want to touch on is the Eagle Run 9th Plaza, where we do have some restricted lanes on 32nd Avenue, and anticipating a full closure of 9th Street West over there in the coming weeks here to work in the medians. So that's about it. I think I will turn it over for questions if you have some.
Questions for Mr. Scott? Any questions for Mr. Scott? Thank you, Mr. Scott. Nice report.
Absolutely.
Number 8 is the city administrator's report. Mrs. Fisk.
Good evening, Commission President and Commissioners. I'm going to start out my list with a question that I received from a couple different bar restaurants. They wanted today at midnight, the moratorium on the sale of alcohol in sealed containers for someone that doesn't have an off-sale license ends. They wanted to know if we were going to extend it. Fargo, I believe, extended to the middle of May. You would have to, if you felt that was necessary, you would have to make that motion to extend it. I believe theirs went to May Not that we won't have to be like Fargo, May 18th. At this point, they are open, even that's 50% capacity, so.
Hey, Mr. Shockley, you have any advice or suggestions there?
No, this is truly a policy decision for the commission. Tina and I spoke earlier today, and it would take a motion by the commission to extend the moratorium, which is set to expire tonight.
Okay. Mayor?
Commissioner Simmons.
Thank you, Mayor. 50% is not enough to bring them back, even near life and what they've missed. So I would make that motion to continue it on until May 18th as of now.
I would second that.
Commissioner Jurdovic seconds. Been moved. Commissioner Simmons moves. Commissioner Jurdovic seconds. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. The next item that I wanted to discuss with you is staff has been working really hard on our return to work plans. We have a lot of protocols in place to keep staff safe and the public safe. We do have employees that are going to be coming and going off and on this week. And then starting the 11th, unless something changes with COVID, because that could change our plans, we plan on having employees start slowly returning with protocols in place. Common areas, they must wear masks. There's sanitizing stations that have been set up by buildings and grounds that have everything we'll need. There'll be thermometers to check temperatures, and we're going to be sending out sheets of protocols to staff before they come back and putting information on their desks on how to manage, the sanitary procedures and so on and so forth. I think Courtney has been hanging up signs all over, and Melissa and her crew have been coming up with all kinds of signage. So slowly but surely, we're going to eventually get back to the new normal. So I just wanted to let you know. In the same token, we've been working closely with Cass County and the city of Fargo so that we're kind of all somewhat similar. Right now, starting on the 11th, we're going to be similar to Cass County and Fargo, where citizens can come by appointment only. And the appointments have to be set up ahead of time, and then we'll have an area that they will go to, and our staff person will have to let them in the building, make sure they sanitize, put on a mask, and then go down to a table. They will do their business, whatever they have to do. If they're passing papers, our staff will wear gloves. And then when the person is done and they leave, we'll sanitize the area again and then go on to the other side of the building. Right now, we're not planning on having anybody other than staff go over to the west side. So anything west of the training rooms, the only people over there should be staff. With that, let me see. You will be getting meeting invites to have discussions on the rate survey that you received tonight. And so those will be over the next week or two. Jim has worked really hard with staff and has submitted information for the tentative CARES Act funding. And it's around $209,000. That includes the $93,350 of liquor license renewals that we waived because that was considered to be an incentive for business. So Jim very intelligently included that on there. So he's been working on that. I talked with staff today. We're going to do some more talking about a testing site. Bernie had brought that up this morning. And so we'll be working on that to see who's available, what's available, what might be a good way to pursue that. The chief of police position closed last Friday. And so we will be gathering applications. I'll be meeting with Jenna and we'll be discussing the process. And I will give you more information as I know what our steps are going forward. And last but not least, this is Courtney's last meeting with us. Courtney has decided to move back to Denver. where her family is. And so we will miss her, but she's going on another adventure, and I wish her the best of luck. Sad for us, but happy for her. So thank you, Courtney. And I will set up that meeting, Bernie, with Horace and you and me.
Let's include Mr. Larson.
Okay. Got it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any correspondence, Mrs. Fisk?
No, I do not.
Commissioners, do you have any non-agenda items that come forward at this time?
I have one thing.
Commissioner Olson.
I've been noticing a lot of golf carts driving around. They don't have lights, turn signals, brake lights, anything, and a lot of the drivers are young kids. So I don't know what the protocol is on that. You see them and they're gone. You don't know where they're headed to. I just don't want anybody getting hurt out there because we're not expecting to see golf carts up and down our city streets. This isn't a resort like it is out in other parts of the country. So just something for our police department to be on the eye for. Or maybe we can put something out on through our communications department.
Yes, Commissioner.
Deputy Chief, comments?
Yes, Commissioner Olson, those would be illegal in the city. So we will work with our social media team. And if you happen to see those when they're out and about, if you wouldn't mind giving us a holler, we'll get into that area and do some education.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Boyer. Anybody else have anything for non-agenda items? Just a quick bit about COVID. I am at City Hall this evening, and Public Works does have tables set up everywhere, sanitizer set up everywhere, gloves set up everywhere. I haven't seen any thermometers or masks yet, but they're at every point, just about every corner of every hallway. So they've done a nice job with that. I just wanted to share with you that every morning at 7:45, there's a daily report that comes out to myself, Mayor Mahoney, Commissioner Chad Peterson, the chairman of the Cass County Commission, and that's at 7:45. So our updates on this COVID and the infection rates is done daily. We never have more than 24-hour-old information. And I think that I'm sharing that with you, and the tracking and the graphs, I'm sharing those with the rest of the commission. Then 3 times a week, Tina and I, Commissioner Peterson from the Cass County Commission, Robert Wilson, their county administrator, Bruce Grubb, the city administrator from Fargo, and the mayor of Fargo, we meet 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And that's part of what's called the Unified Command, which the governor and the Department of Commerce and our 3 entities all wanted to do. And that's keeping in tune of what everybody's doing, what we're seeing, and it's just a great communication tool that takes place. And we've all been involved in that. And then I also have a weekly meeting with Essentia, Sanford, all the nursing home administrators in the area, the VA, and Prairie Psych as to what they're seeing on their numbers, what Eventide is seeing, what Sanford's seeing, what the nursing home people are seeing, and keeping us all up to abreast on that. And the reason I bring these meetings up because Mayor Mahoney, myself, and Commissioner Peterson have been involved in a lot of discussions, ongoing discussions, both with the Department of Commerce and with the governor's office. They're asking us for insight of what we're seeing on the ground here with regard to the population. Are they honoring the social distancing? Are they wearing some masks? What we're seeing. And so going forward, since the bars and restaurants and hair salons and barbershops have opened back up, they're going to continue to ask us for what we're seeing. So if you have any insight onto that when you're out and about in the community, This evening, I'm going to drive by every licensed bar in West Fargo. I just want to see what kind of crowds they've got. So, any type of insight that you can give, and, stop in and patronize these folks if you can. And I encourage the public to do the same, but with all the good protocols and rules that have been set forth. So that's all I have. Is there any other non-agenda items any of the commissioners might have? Commissioner Simmons.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Olson.
A second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we adjourned. All those in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Everybody's waiting for that.
Be safe and be
The
healthy.
recording has stopped.